people behave to the incentives, and you can see it happen in real time. Incredibly fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think outrage is the best example here.
Just like the bathtub, when you build it up to such a level, the pulling of the plug, long way to fall, my friend.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
I'm going to say right now, I'm proud of Snoop Dogg for carrying the Olympic torch.
Why?
Because it's kind of like this. It's similar to this. You know, I went to see Nas with the Colorado Symphony 2-3 weeks ago, something like that. And as I'm watching this dude, so Nas, rapper from the 90s, you know, that's when he became big. I'm sitting there. He's with the Colorado Symphony. He's wearing a tuxedo at Red Rocks in Colorado. Beautiful. And I'm thinking, this dude, if you go back 30 years, 0% chance he would see himself in this situation. So to get that type of opportunity, I think is pretty massive. Can you see Calvin Broadus, when murder was the case that they gave him, thinking, I'm going to go from here to Olympic glory?
Well, listen, how did I not know about this Nas show? That sounds fabulous. Sorry, I'm so hung up. I can't even talk about Calvin right now. That sounds amazing. How was the show?
At minimum, top 3 for me all time. It was great. He crushed it. Like, it was so tight.
Now
he
you're just doing
integrated
that because you know I'm already mad that I missed
Oh
it.
yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. He integrated so well with the symphony. Like, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing.
well, I know you didn't even want to go there, but whether you're talking Calvin Broadus or Nas or Jay-Z or like a lot of that crew, I will say I standing O applause for how they've navigated their career like
Absolutely.
30 years later. So good. Yeah, whether you're playing with the Colorado Symphony or carrying the Olympic torch or creating music empires, like props. Great job.
As they say in the location of the Olympics, absolument.
So
Okay.
anyway, can we go back and rewind? Sorry, I know this is herky jerky. Why does Snoop Dogg get to carry the Olympic torch in Paris? I don't understand. Like, this does not compute.
Well, you know, he was born in Paris. You bought that for exactly 0 milliseconds.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Dude. But this guy has gotten all sorts of connections now. I mean, the fact that he's done a collab with Martha Stewart, like, who knows? He has connections up to the highest levels of authority and can do whatever he wants.
I think it's a PR team. Snoop, shoot me the details of your PR team. I'm not sure if I can afford them, but I want them to run things behind the scenes for the Skippy Doogles show.
Yeah, Snoop's going to be like, I'm not telling you what I'm doing in Puerto Rico.
The things you don't know, Doogles. All right. So when I talk about the richest NBA players, let's just continue the theme. Okay. Richest NBA players. I know the top 3 is probably Jordan, LeBron, Magic Johnson's up there. He owns part of the Dodgers.
Those are the 3. Those are the 3 that rise to the top for sure.
Number 4, my boy, Junior Bridgeman. Yeah.
Oh, JRB.
I bet you don't even know about Junior.
Tell me.
He just has this crazy work ethic. So he was working in the NBA, making a few bucks, and then he picked up a job at the fast food drive-through lane on the side, you know, on homestands.
Yeah.
And just, you know, then he bought some Bitcoin and called it good.
Okay, this is all a lie. What I will focus on for 1 second, though, because I think this is important, is when folks today are thinking about NBA players and the money they're making, you're thinking about contracts like that someone can just give $100 million back to their team and it ain't no thing, right? I mean, that's the way the contracts are today. Back in these days, and he was a 6-man, Junior Bridgeman. Back in these days, it was different. I mean, my boy, his initial contract was something, I think, like $150,000 a year.
Yeah, so played 1975 to 1984. Never made more than $350,000 a season. Total career earnings of $2.9 million. Impressive, especially for that time, but not like these guys today making $50 million bucks a year, right?
Exactly.
Yet somehow he's worth $600 million. How, Doogles? How?
Wendy's, my girl Wendy. That's how we did it. He pulled on those red pigtails and catapulted himself to financial freedom. I do love the the way this happened because he was trying to learn. He could see, he said he and his teammates could tell by the amount of money they're making that this can't be it. You're not going to be able to just retire from the NBA and live off of the fruits of that labor. We got to do something different. There was an opportunity from, I think it was the GM, owner, something like that, who brought an opportunity to the team and said for 150K over the next few years, there's this investment opportunity in a cable provider, local cable provider. And he said, I'm in, let's do this. And that was his first taste of what owning assets can look like. I love that. And he calls for financial literacy now. He's like, people don't get this kind of financial literacy generally when it comes to NBA players, just get a bunch of money. Can I say one quote? Can I give you one quote? Okay, because I thought this was cool. So there's this quote in the piece. It's ESPN, by the way, is what this is from. It says, what I'm scared and concerned about now is you start to get that feeling that I've got so much money that I can't really blow it all. That's the first step in blowing it all.
As soon as you take your eye off the ball hits you in the face. This is a great read if you want it. We won't go into details, but he learned about ownership and bought Wendy's franchises, bought other businesses, and now he has the fourth most money of anyone that has played in the NBA based on this unscientific article here.
Yeah.
But I think that's a fair assessment. There's different ways to get to the top if you consider the top having a lot of money. I don't personally, but I think I love this. Basically you're at an average NBA player in the 70s who the story, what you're saying is so important. He got his first paycheck, he paid taxes, he bought his parents a gift, he did all those things, and he's like, there's not that much money left over. And a lot of people that play professional basketball get injured year two, and then it's up. Yep. So he very quickly realized he needed a plan of attack after his playing days, and he executed that perfectly. It's a really cool story. Yep. Love it.
Love it. Love it. All right. Can I fishbowl reach?
Yeah.
I'm going to reach in the fishbowl and talk about a topic we've discussed a couple times on here, universal basic income. This particular universal basic income topic comes to us via Sam Altman. Y'all know Sam Altman as the CEO, then removed CEO, and then CEO again of OpenAI. But this was
he got removed for like 48 hours. Chill here.
I think it was 72 because it was a weekend.
Oh my goodness. Wait, a weekend is 48 for the record. Just for the record, unless it was a holiday weekend.
Ooh, could have been. Anyway, all right. So Sam Altman, through OpenResearch, is a nonprofit that he has, ran this universal basic income study. It was about 3,000 people between the ages of 21 and 40 in Texas and Illinois in the United States of America. What they did was they took folks that earned less than $30,000 per year, and for a third of those fine folks, they gave them $1,000 per month. So let's think about this. If you're making 30 grand a year and you get another $12,000, you're 40, 50% increase, depending on exactly where you are in that, your income. So significant funds. And then the other 2/3, they gave $50 a month. That was a control group. So everyone got money, but some people got buku wuku amounts. Some people got a little bit less, a lot of bit less, I should say. So that's the setup. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what they wanted to see was, what do people do with the money? How does it help them with things like stress, health, etc.? What they learned was, one, and a couple things not surprising, but I think overall it's a start of something interesting, all directional, of course. So what they found, one, is there was not a major difference when it comes to employment levels between the groups. But those folks that got more money, they felt more agency and freedom in the type of employment they could have. They felt like they could be pickier. They didn't have to take the first quote unquote frappy job, right, that came their way just to make money. So that's good. Agency, freedom, makes perfect sense. Another thing they learned was the recipients, they spent more across all categories, but in particular, they increased their basic needs, the spending on their basic needs. So things like rent, things like food, beverages, right? And transportation. Those were the biggest areas that they spent money on. They increased them substantially in those areas. They did not increase substantially their housing payments, like mortgage payments, because most of them don't own homes, but rent, they did. So it's a pretty cool situation. Another aspect that I found to be interesting here is they found that in the first year, going back to stress health, in the first year, there was a material in or decrease in the stress levels of those people that got the money. But in years 2 and 3, it dissipated. I think that makes sense given human psychology. I think it's a little surprising, but it's like at first they go, whew, okay, huge weight off my shoulders. But then once you start getting into years 2 and 3, everything levels. It seems like Sam Altman in particular is invested in things like UBI because of his thoughts around what particular AI could do for people's jobs. And so he wants to get a sense for how to maybe try and level the playing field, or at least look like he's going to. I don't know how much he really cares about it, but that's where his investment comes from.
Fortunately for me, it was kind of a mixed bag of results, and it felt like all the other universal basic income studies I read. Certainly what you said makes perfect sense, right? For the first year, stress levels are going to go down, and then people get used to that level of income as their new status quo and adjust to it. Okay, I don't want to be dramatic here. I'm a little underwhelmed by the findings. Does this really change any core beliefs you had about UBI or anything else?
No core beliefs. I think that the increased spending on basic needs, what that likely shows, and it shows people that's under $30,000 a year. I think what it shows is $30,000 a year is not enough to meet people's basic needs, which I don't think that's like a surprising point. But if, like, let's say they'd chosen folks at 50, it might have been different. Like I could see them having different spending levels potentially. So that was one thing. It didn't change any core beliefs though.
Would this be a totally crazy study? And tell me if anyone's done something like this. Would it be crazy to take a group of people with flexible, like remote jobs, and that currently live in an expensive location and have them relocate to an inexpensive location and keep the same job and see how their spending shifts and if their stress level is reduced? And like what I'm getting is there a way to run a similar experience that's not necessarily handing someone money, but it's changing their circumstance?
You're saying it's changing their level of Skippies?
That's right. Yeah.
So decrease their cost versus increase their income. That's interesting. I don't think I've seen that. People did that in 2020, I think, for themselves. And they just started spending a lot of money on vacations and got into debt. Was what that large scale study did. Has that been
formally written up in the same way? I'd like to see it.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I do think it's
to your point, maybe with 2020, you could get a sample size. I don't think you'd have the granularity you need on the type of spending that happened.
No, it's
maybe with credit card statements or something.
Maybe, but you don't really have a control group. I don't like it's not in the same way. I do think something like that could be interesting.
Okay.
All right, what you got next?
We talked last week about how it appears like Trump will be speaking at the Bitcoin conference, and now there's rumors that Vice President Harris might be speaking at the Bitcoin conference as well. And for some reason, this is fascinating to me. I came across a survey of Bitcoin adoption in the United States from the Yakamoto Project. I don't know much about this organization. I'm going to take this at face value that they did quality work here. The thing I found most interesting is they tried to identify your Bitcoiner, by race or sex or location or something. And it seems like I'm painting with a broad brush here a little bit, but it seems like there's not really a type. Like it's not a high income thing or a low income thing. It's not a black or a white thing. It's not a male or a female thing. It's not an East Coast or West Coast thing. I was kind of surprised at the level of randomness that seems to appear in the Bitcoin adoption charts that they have.
There are two things that stood out. One, there was the one place it did seem to skew was young and male. So it wasn't, to your point, pure male, female. I think you're right, but young and male. The other thing is what I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong there. What I don't believe that it does is look at the quantity of Bitcoin that you have. I think it's just like percent of humans that own Bitcoin versus if you look at the concentration of Bitcoin, how would that change? And I bet you that would probably skew some things.
That was my understanding as well, but I think that'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy and saying high income people have the most net worth in Bitcoin. So I actually like the idea of just anyone that has played around with it almost.
So I agree with your point, but also if you took a different asset, like let's choose A different, maybe alternative asset. Some you might say that actually high income people stay away from that particular asset. There's a little bit of self-fulfilling prophecy, but I would be curious as to whether maybe it'd be like percent of portfolio versus percent of ownership, but something like that, because it
Sure,
could just be a
sure.
flyer versus some who has Bitcoin as 90% of their wealth, right? Or something like that. I think it'd be interesting.
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. Generally, overall, across the political spectrums, it didn't seem to be different. Across gender purely, it didn't really seem to be different. Incomes, it skewed a little bit more high income, but not really. It was basically across all. They did something that was also, I think they called it like moral values, which was kind of a weird one. I couldn't really figure out what they were doing there.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
But it didn't seem to
That
matter.
was odd to me. But at a high level, you're right. I should have mentioned the skew towards young and male, but generally all these charts look pretty balanced across almost
Yeah.
any type of question you ask. And that for some reason is fascinating to me.
The other thing that they named as a takeaway is that the people that owned Bitcoin, they like believed in Bitcoin more, they said. So that their takeaway was the more that you understand Bitcoin, the more likely you are to own it. I feel like the more that you own something, the more likely you are to believe in it. I think it happens. You have to like tell yourself it's great.
And I feel like the more people that have a bomb shelter with jars
Yes,
of peanut butter in the bottom are likely to say that peanut butter is a great snack for a bomb shelter.
exactly.
Yeah,
uh,
the takeaway of like the more you know, the more into it you are. I don't think it's exactly that. I'm with you.
no, no. All right. Can I reach in?
You can reach in, but before we switch to crypto, I want to mention one thing. Have you played with Polymarket at all?
No.
Polymarket is a crypto backed polymarket.com, crypto backed almost betting platform. Nate Silver and others have done this, and their thought, I believe, is that political polling, to use that as the main example, is inherently biased. But if you create real live markets behind things, your predictions improve. If you can even call it a prediction, the probability of events happening happens in real time because when there's disconnect there, people rush in with money to correct that because there's money to be made, right?
Can we back up for a second? So the way this
Yeah.
works is you put money on what you believe is going to happen. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So, yep. So you can
Okay.
bet on Trump to win, on Harris to win, on Harris to be the nominee, on if JD Vance will say couch this week. That's an inside joke for people that like the Twitter memes, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is fascinating. And maybe we'll talk about it on another show. But Doogles, you got to just play around with it because the idea behind we're not going to call 1,000 people with landlines like they used to do for these political surveys in Pennsylvania, right?
Yep.
That's naturally skewed one direction or another. To say, like, we're just going to allow people to put their money where their mouth is super fascinating.
I would go out there on a limb and say that if you only polled people with landlines, it would skew heavily toward Trump.
Maybe, but if I remember, this is almost a decade old that I'm thinking of an article that referenced some of this, and it was relating to Nate Silver's forecasting model and stuff.
Yep.
Then they try and correct all that. So in this extreme example, when they're only calling people with landlines, and the only people they talk to are the people that pick up the landline and then are willing to talk to them, then they try and make all these adjustments to, okay, well, our sample size is probably skewed X way. And so it just becomes this massive challenge. And then you have a different survey method in different locations run by different people with different sample sizes. I think it turned into a huge mess. And I think that's why Nate Silver kind of took off, because he had the wherewithal to digest all that and build a holistic model around it. But we know that model hasn't been perfect.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. Check out polymarket.com.
Okay.
I think it's fascinating. And I've watched over the past week some of the movements in some of those prediction markets. And it's not just politics, it can be other things as well.
Yep.
And it's fascinating to think about if that's an efficient market that is appropriately predicting current probabilities of future events. It's really fascinating to watch.
All right. I'll check it out. Yeah, I haven't taken a look, so I'll check that out. What was the fishbowl item you're going to grab?
I like the guys at Alpha Architect, Wes Gray and team. I have for years. It's possible I'm biased here. July 1st, Wes did some promotion around a new ETF they have, relatively new, called CAOS. Ticker is CAOS. Before I even talk about the product, I'm going to give you a little background. Nicholas Taleb and do you remember his business partner's name?
No.
Universa Investments LP. Mark Spitznagel and Nicholas Taleb run this. It's basically put options on the S&P. They run this fund that's all about if the world blows up, we make money. Does ring a bell to you at all?
Yep. Yeah.
Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, all his stuff, right? And the idea is super cool. I've tried to recreate it in various ways over the years. And what happens if you're always betting against a market that goes up is you lose money 99% of the time. And you originally invest $100, and if the market continues to perform as it does historically, compounding between 7 to 10% a year, all of a sudden 10 years later, your $100 turns into $2, and you're going, well, that was stupid of me. Like how much of a doomsday predictor can I be without losing all my money? So it very much makes sense to it can, not for everyone, it can make sense to hedge against, a Black Swan event, a Black Friday in 1987, or other, Two Sigma events on the negative side. That can be a wise investment strategy. I know funds that do this, and they effectively put about 2% of their investments in some sort of hedge against unforeseen negative event. It's always been a cool idea to me. Can you add to that or more clearly explain anything there?
No, I think I can see your curiosity in it, and I think the way you explained it makes a lot of sense. Having something when the market goes down that protects your portfolio is something that makes sense.
Okay. So I've played around with, more out of curiosity than anything else, but I've played around with how to create something like this hedge fund on your own. And what usually happens is it's expensive, it's time consuming, and the market goes up a lot more than it goes down, and you just end up kind of throwing money in a fireplace.
Yep.
And so I usually come back to the fact that investment grade bonds, government bonds, some sort of other investment to reduce turbulence in your portfolio makes a lot more sense than betting for the doomsday scenario.
Yep.
What Alpha Architect has done with CAOS is effectively blend together box spreads, which would just basically create like a fixed income asset that would make you 5 to 10% a year in your average year in the current environment, and some put options that would protect against this doomsday event. So like in 2020, the fund goes up 22%, but in like 2022, it goes down 14%. But other than that, it's 3 to 5% a year, right? Like it's way better than losing your shirt with the
so how would you
Spitznagel
how would you play this? Because like the thing I would expect from something like this where I'm trying to hedge my portfolio is I would own some smallish percent of my portfolio would be this, and when the market loses, it would take off. So it'd be like super helpful. And if I had this as a small percent of my portfolio, when my portfolio, let's say in 2022, I can't remember exactly, but I think it went down like 17, 18%, something like that. And if this goes down 14%, like it's not helpful as a small hedge. So how would you use it?
In 2022, so here's what I would argue. Oh, fascinating. I forgot that 2020 was like such a bizarre year because you had the mini crash, but then we finished up 18%.
The market, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I would argue, Doogles. Remember how you were playing with the Doogles indicator?
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that you ever said you were formally like going to do this, but you were considering if your indicator said the market was like incredibly overvalued,
yep,
that you might bet against the market with a large position.
Yep.
I was uneasy with that at the time. And I would continue to be uneasy with that at the time because, as I remember, you were talking about long-term put options.
Yep.
And if those don't hit, that large position that you would take goes to zero. In a perfect world, you could use something like this CAOS ETF, and potentially, if the market explodes, make a decent return. We're looking at their historical returns here in 2020 when the market pulled back for a brief period. This fund ended up 22% positive, so it benefited from that pullback. The every other year, it does about 3%. Like it does a bond like fixed income like return. I think that's potentially valuable as a tool in your portfolio.
Okay, so the way in my head then, this could not work as a small percentage hedge in your portfolio. You'd have to really bet, like this would have to be your portfolio for the year.
It could. It wouldn't be incredibly meaningful. Like if you're a person that believes that you should have 80% stocks and 20% bonds, you could carve out that 20%. And if you get comfortable with chaos and if you feel like the markets are overvalued, you could have as much as 20% of your portfolio. If you're a 90-10 person, you could have so I think what I like so much about it is it's basically fixed income with more downside protection.
Yep.
If you've ever held bonds, government treasuries through the market imploding, you know that the value of those bonds goes up because that fixed rate of return on the coupon, effectively stays steady, and that becomes more valuable because returns everywhere else will get less valuable. So a similar thing, I haven't decided like what my approach is going to be, but I just liked that Wes brought it to my attention and think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah. Okay.
It's probably not for everyone. It might not even be for me.
So I now I see if I think about this as, which I think it was kind of positioned as a hedge against my equity portfolio, I think
exactly.
I don't feel as strongly there because I picture hedges as being something that's a smaller portion of my portfolio. But if the way you just described it, if I picture this as in a situation where I would be buying bonds to buy something that can sometimes have an equity-like return, but over the long period kind of serves as like a bond, I think that for me, just given my psychology, I think makes more sense. But it can probably serve as either, depending on the person.
Let's go back to your example where you have some indicator. It's a personal decision you're making. You have some indicator that says, I think the next 12 months in the stock market is going to be horrible. It's just a Doogles belief, and I want to hedge there. And so I'm taking a big chunk of my portfolio and effectively betting against it.
Yep.
I would argue it would, like, if we have that debate on the show, I'm going to be like, you should do bonds. You should do something safer. Like, don't end up kind of flipping a coin where that position could go to zero, which is what you do with the right long-term put. And the middle ground there, Doogles, is probably like, it's not a long-term put and it's not a super safe bond that Skippy's telling you to do. It might be something in between, which has a little bit of both those characteristics, like the CAOS ETF. That's where I think it fits. And then you could go, you know what? If the world blows up, I'm going to make a 30% return on that position this year. And that's an estimate on my end. But if the world doesn't blow up, I'm going to plug along and not lose any money or make a 3% return. Like, to me, that's appealing.
Yeah. So the words you just said make sense to me. The returns I'm looking at for this is where that falls apart. Because I would say in 2018, in 2022, which were the last times that the market fell, that this would have to make me money in order for me to agree with that. And it lost money in both those years, just like my equities did. So it doesn't play that role.
Yes. In 2020, it did, though.
But the market also made money in 2020. Like that's the
true. So here's the deal. You go back and this is something I just wasn't aware of. I didn't realize it had been around since 2013. I'll tell you that the worst time frame in modern history for U.S. stock markets to test a CAOS ETF are from 2013 to today. We haven't really had a significant blow up since 2008 or since
That's
2000,
true.
like,
But
so
20,
I'd love to see the back to
2022 was close. Like it's the closest that we've had. Market was down almost 20%.
true.
I'm gonna look more at this. I want to read the overview and take a gander. If the overall point is there might be some there, what I want to figure out is what is the there, because it does not seem like it's something where if you had a small percentage of your portfolio that were inputs, let's just say,
Mhm.
if the market blows up, they are more valuable. That's just like that's the way it works. This
Absolutely.
this does not work exactly in that way, but there's like some role it seems like for it to play. I just can't figure out what the role is.
Yeah, you're right. If I think I'd be completely sold if the performance was better in 2018 and 2022.
Yeah, there's something
And
though.
without like pulling back the exact holdings at that point in time. To be honest,
Yeah.
it's surprising that it did so well in 2020. You know what? Here's what I bet. Don't have this in front of me, but I think a slow car crash, you'll know what I mean here, meaning
Hmm.
the the market slowly trickles down for multiple months. The way Mark Spitznagel buys, he buys like puts 2 months out, 30% below the
Yep.
current price.
Yep.
So the only time that cashes in is when like a big car wreck happens, and it happens
Yep.
quickly.
Yep.
I imagine this strategy, and I should read some more literature, does something very similar. And so in the years, it's the doomsday. It's the very quick pullback where they make significant money. And in the slow car crash, you just perform like kind of like equities. And to your point, that's disappointing. But it might be the only way you can implement a strategy like this in a cost
Maybe.
effective way.
I'm gonna look more at it because I've only spent a little bit of time. I'm gonna look more at it. We can talk.
All
All
right.
right, I'm gonna reach into the fishbowl. I got one more item. This is from Collab Fund, but not from Morgan. Not from Morgan, my friends.
I mean, Morgan, we need to have a talk here. You can't just outsource your writing. I mean, when is the last guest host we had on the Skippy and Doogles show? We show up every day. We work hard.
That's,
Although
I love that.
maybe I should stop. Maybe Morgan's telling me something.
So this Ted Lamont put this out. It's called Fill the Bathtub. The rationale for that, he tells us the story of when he was a kid. His father was explaining to him how trust works because he and his brother had lost something that was important to his dad. His father explains how trust works. He says, if you take an eyedropper and you start filling up the bathtub, how long would that take to fill? They go, that would take a long time, Daddy. He said, yeah, that would take a long time. Picture that like trust. You slowly build it over time.
Mm-hmm.
When you break that trust, though, it's like pulling the plug at the bottom, the drain, the bottom of the bathtub. It goes away super quickly. It takes a long time to build, short time to go away. It's a pretty good analogy. I think that visual can be super helpful, and it's true. That's the basis. That's the fill the bathtub. The argument that's made in here, and there are a couple awesome classic zingers from Munger in here that he throws out, which is just like it's a cheap way to get some good reads, but it also works. So I'm good with it.
Yeah, is that why you sent it to me? Because of the Munger? Because I was
I thought you might read it
I
because
know
of the
all these
Munger.
Munger quotes already.
I know they're so good though. They're so good. We'll name a couple of those in a moment. No, but the crux of this, once he gets into it, is he's saying that society now has gotten to this point where we are in like a trust losing position nearly all the time because of the number of over promises that have to be made. It says technology has helped to decrease the time it takes to do a bunch of stuff, but it's also increased people's desire for immediate results. That's not new, but it's still important for us to repeat and understand. And because of this desire for immediate results, people have changed the incentive structure that drives the economy. So he talks about influencers, he talks about the media, he talks about politicians, he talks about investors. And he says what happens is you make this overpromise and you have to crush the overpromise in order for people to take you seriously. So you overpromise, then you have to, like, if you're a stock, you have to crush your results. If you're a politician, you overpromise, and then you have to or at least seemingly over deliver what you do, and then you have to one up yourself. So
Yeah,
overpromise, over deliver, overpromise, over deliver, and
no, the best example here is outrage. So you want more views on your social platform of choice? Outrage is a nice way to do it. And then you get views from your initial outrage. You have to find more outrage. You have to find more. You have to be more hyperbolic,
Yep.
more pedantic, more, and it feeds, not to completely derail us, but what Musk has done with the incentives on X and how there's significant changes and how it's pretty much backed by paychecks and how you've seen that platform evolve to the Munger quote exactly. Like people behave to the incentives and you can see it happen in real time. It's incredibly fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think Outrage is the best example here. It's
That is.
yeah.
And when you, just like the bathtub, when you build it up to such a level, the pulling of the plug, long way to fall, my friend. Long way to fall. That's the point. Here are the two Munger quotes, and they're classic. One, to what you were just talking to, show me the incentives, and I will show you the outcome. That one will live forever. It's so good. The second Munger quote he throws out is the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. For that one, honestly, I'm not even sure what that has to do with this article, but it's in there and it's great.
I think he's going to you work so hard with that eyedropper to fill up the bathtub. You better think twice before you hit the drain. So because your goodwill, your trust does compound in a way. If you have enough quality relationships with people that trust you, the amount of blessings that are about to head your way in business, monetarily or otherwise, is going to be overwhelming at some point. But that all disappears so quickly when you say, you know what, the easy way out here is to drain that bathtub, to lose all the hard work that
I'd take a little differently. I think what it is, but you made me think about this, is when you're sitting there on the side of the tub and you're filling up with the eyedropper, it says when someone shows up with a bucket full of water, you tell them, no, I'm just going to keep dropping in the eyedropper. Because
is this a leverage joke?
It could be, because I think what he's saying is like it says slow and steady wins the race. Is basically, it's a similar thing. He goes like, keep doing that, because when people start throwing buckets in, it's more likely that the drain will pop out. If you keep dumping buckets of water, you lose control. You're trying to over deliver on something, right? I think that's the point. Just stick with the eyedropper. But it's super hard to stick with the eyedropper when you see Jimmy Buckets down in Miami draining buckets, right? I tried, it didn't work out. No, but when people show up with all this buckets of water, it's just like he brings up in here, 1995 to 1999, Berkshire Hathaway versus the Nasdaq. He said Berkshire Hathaway was down to the Nasdaq by like 30% a year, I think is what he says in this post. That's super hard. When you're seeing that, it's hard to stick with the eyedropper. It's easier to go, oh, I'm just going to load up on pets.com because that seems like it's taken off. But it's much more likely that you're going to end up over promising and under delivering, and maybe even the short term, if not the long term, in that world. It's classic stuff.
Yeah. What was your favorite part of the post?
It was the piece that I mentioned around having to consistently one up yourself was what stood out. And because there comes a point where you can't anymore. And you can't authentically or organically anymore, but the pressure is still there to one up. And so then you start to search for ways to make it happen. And that's when you get out over your skis. That's the part that stood out. That's when leverage for investors might come into play. So you're like, oh, okay. So I said I'm going to beat earnings by this amount. So how do I do that? All right, well, let me try and find a trick. Then if that works, then you're like, okay, well, now the bar's been raised and I still haven't really figured out how to do it. So now let me go buy a company. Yes. Right. I think that's the part, consistently having to one up yourself.
When you talk about that, I think of Jack Welch and this desire to never miss. My takeaway was similar, and it's related, but it's almost like you can't do that authentically and you can't do that and build trust. So the way to do it is to show up every day and work hard, which is just filling the bathtub. And sometimes it's boring. It's not always like sparkly or exciting, but it's just kind of, you keep plugging along, and then all of a sudden things explode from there because of the foundation of hard work that you put into it.
It's classic stuff. And I think that it's really important for people to remember it, and it's worth repeating, even if you hear it 1,000 times, because it is so difficult in the moment to deny yourself that instant gratification, but it's critical too in the long term.
Great. That's it, right, Doogles?
Yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Special round of applause. Doogles joined us from the middle of the Pacific Ocean today. Nice work.
On a
enjoy
raft.
That sunshine. Yeah, he's He has a volleyball he's talking to right now, calling Skippy. I don't know what's happening here. Hit us up with listener mail, skippydoogles@gmail.com. All other things, skippydoogles.com. If you want to get the show early and help support the show, hear about our stock picks and a bunch of other fun stuff, you can go to skippydoogles.supercast.com and grab a premium subscription. We appreciate that whenever it happens. Talk to you next week.
Bye.